Julian, you've really surprised me, because to begin with, you're going to talk about a person from the 12th century and a woman. Two big surprises.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, that people talk about classical music, but they don't necessarily realize how long a period of time we're talking about, and all these composers are so different. Interestingly, with this lady, Hildegard von Bingen, we know a lot about her. She was an extraordinary polymath figure. She wrote treatises on medicine and even became a saint. They called her a saint.
And how do you know that what she was writing in the 12th century is classical music? What kind of definition are you using?
This is the whole basic question. What is classical music? At the time, a lot of what we call classical music from that period came out of the church. We know it's classical music as soon as we hear it. There's no other real possible definition for it.
What sort of instruments was she able to compose for? Were the instruments very different in those days?
Mostly, she composed for voices. And in fact, this string quartet is a piece that was originally for voices.
Music written for the church, for the human voice, by a saint. And you could almost hear it there soaring through a Norman abbey, couldn't you?
Yeah, it's very meditative, isn't it? It's extraordinary.
Now we're going to make quite a jump centuries-wise, a good 400 years to Vivaldi.
They called him the Red Priest, because he had very ginger, striking hair, apparently, and was usually hidden under a white wig, so we don't really have many paintings of that. But he was called the Red Priest, and he was quite a fiery character too. Quite out of fashion for a time. While he was alive, he was very well known. His music went out of fashion. And some composers have been quite rude about it. Stravinsky said he didn't write 400 concertos, he wrote the same concerto 400 times.
And this piece illustrates the four seasons of the year. Now, do you think that his soundscape succeeds in conveying to us those four seasons?
I think he really did, and you think he's just working with a string orchestra. Each movement says the time of the year, and this has to be spring.
Sounded to me like some of the bird song of spring.
At the end there's little birds chirping away.
Julian, one of your least surprising choices is Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and I suppose a lot of people think they know about him because some of his music is so popular and they've seen movies about Mozart. But for you, what is the greatness of Mozart?
It's really hard to describe it. I think he was a total genius. And I read a lovely quote from him that he said, "I choose the notes that love each other." And that's a wonderful quote. And when you hear his music, it sounds exactly right.
And although he died in his 30s, there was an enormous amount of work produced in that period. And of course, it covered a whole range of different sorts of music.
He wrote so much music and he lived for his music.
Why is he an important moment in music?
Well, all his successors have pointed to Mozart as being, a massive influence.
Did you get a particular pleasure with your cello playing Mozart?
Well, this is the one mistake he made in his life, or at least the one mistake I feel he made. He never wrote a cello concerto. He never wrote for cello, which is extremely irritating. But I then got to conduct some of his music, which was wonderful, because I never really had the chance to play Mozart before.
So to represent Mozart, you could have chosen operas, symphonies,
of course,
any number of concertos.
Yeah.
In fact, you've chosen one of the best known pieces, most popular pieces,
yes.
A little night music, eine kleine Nachtmusik. Why so?
Everyone knows this, and this is really sort of quintessential Mozart. This is his style, and as he said, he chose the notes that he loves.
So very popular, so very familiar, almost hackneyed, but you can still hear the brilliance there, can you?
But it's so simple, and yet it's genius.
Julian, I suppose on any list of classical music there would be Ludwig van Beethoven, because here was a man whose work apparently can be divided roughly into 3 phases.
There were no rules for him. He completely rewrote any rules that there might be. And so he just took classical music, or music, to a different dimension.
This poor man was going deaf from quite an early age. And war was raging throughout Europe, and he was very aware of the politics of Europe. Say something about the strains that must have been upon him.
Composers are sensitive to what's happening, and it very much affected his writing. I think that you're going to hear that with the start of Beethoven 5. And I think his deafness it was a tragedy for a musician. And in some of the later works, you hear him put these low trills down. It's going down the bottom of the band. And they're going on and on and on under the music. And people are saying, was that actually his tinnitus?
So the first piece we're going to hear from Beethoven is Opus 18. Julian, you've given up your position at the piano to younger talent, which we're going to hear in just a moment. We're still with Beethoven, but now we're on to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. And it seems to me that this piece of music almost stands on its own, as though we put it on a pedestal. If you asked a person to name a single piece of classical music, I bet they might well name Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Why so, do you think?
It's extraordinary. I mean, you just hear this beginning. Nobody ever written a piece of music like that before. So it's a one-off.
We move on from Beethoven to Tchaikovsky, and this seems to me a very important geographical change.
Yes.
Because most of the music we've heard so far has been from what I would call Western Europe, Southern Europe, but anyway, Catholic Europe, Protestant Europe. Now suddenly we go to Orthodox Europe. This Russian who had such an influence on music everywhere.
Yes, I mean, I actually get irritated with the phrase Western classical music because so much of the music I love comes from Russia, and I never thought that that was categorized as the West, and it almost seems political to me.
I rather think of Tchaikovsky in two parts. Some of those symphonies that absolutely tear at your heart, the most emotional and tragic music. And then some of those marvellous ballet steps, that simplest of tunes that stick in your mind forever.
But he was a fantastic melodist, wasn't he? I mean, he really could write a tune, as we're going to hear. I think it's fascinating going from this Beethoven 5 to Tchaikovsky's Romeo and Juliet, because Beethoven really showed that he tore up the rule book and paved the way for Tchaikovsky to be able to write something which is so completely different. It made Russian music really be taken seriously across the world.
Julian, you have chosen a single example of a living composer, an American. Why so?
Because I think he's sort of entered into the public consciousness. His style of music, when people hear it, you can say, that's Philip Glass. I mean, he's a Marmite composer. You either love him or loathe him. I've seen audiences of really young people come to his music. So, exciting composer. He made no money at all, as usual, most composers like this, until a bit later on, and he used to drive a cab around New York. So it's very urban music.
Well, thanks to our guide, Julian Lloyd Webber, we have rushed through centuries of music from the 12th to the 21st, and somehow it has all been recognisably classical music. I think it's been extremely important to the human race over that period, and to our humanity, in the sense that nothing has better expressed our joy or our tragedy or our ethical dilemmas or our suffering. Nothing has been better at all of that than classical music. And I would ask our quartet now to play us out with, what? Some Mozart.